Hello, and welcome to Global Scalpels, a podcast dedicated to the 5 billion people worldwide who lack access to safe and affordable surgery.
I'm Rihanna.
And I'm Taylor.
And together we're Global Scalpels.
As a neurosurgery resident at Duke and a research fellow at the Program in Global Surgery and Social Change at Harvard Medical School, our guest today focuses on global neurosurgery research, policy, and advocacy to promote health system strengthening. She is also a founder of the Gender Equity Initiative in Global Surgery. In addition to all of her global health works, she is also a healthcare contributor for Forbes.com. Her articles have been featured in numerous media articles, including CNN, Huffington Post, and Newsweek, as well as in academic journals such as JAMA and The Lancet. So with that amazing background, we would like to welcome to the show Jacquelyn Corley.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're very, very excited to have you here with us today. As an expert in a lot of different things, we could just pick your brain for hours. But we wanted to start with gender equity, something that you're very familiar with and been a huge advocate for. And we're really thankful for all the work that you've been doing. As we know, only about 12% of neurosurgery residents in the United States are women. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to neurosurgery and how your experience has been as a woman in the field?
That's a great question, to be honest, because it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think like any field in medicine, but maybe more so in neurosurgery being so male dominated, there's definitely some obstacles and some kind of tough situations to navigate. I think in my experiences, there's been some times where I have just experienced outright sexism, like full on comments or discrimination or, I think probably more commonly than that, it's just more subtle ways of discrimination and subtle ways like you're evaluated or you're treated by supervisors, peers. Even with all that said, though, I think what's actually nice about the perspective that I've had is that I've been able to experience actually the overwhelming support that I've had by men and women. And so while there has been small obstacles here and there, I've also felt like I've had huge support from my co-residents, from faculty, family, other people in healthcare. I think that's been actually a good takeaway, the experiences I've had so far. And then the other thing is that because there's so few women, we've sort of created a community. And that too has been a great source of support. When you're a minority in a field, you kind of know everybody that is also part of that minority. And so there's this unsaid bond that you want to support each other, that we are here to advance gender equity initiatives, really all gender. It's not just women, but it's gender equity. So that includes all genders that people could possibly identify with. So I'll leave it at that.
No, that's fantastic. You're saying you've experienced a lot of this sexism or discrimination or anything. So what actually drew you to neurosurgery as a field and kind of started you on this journey of neurosurgery and being a surgeon?
I think anybody who's in neurosurgery would probably agree with me is that once you've done it or seen it, you just can't do anything else. It's the most amazing field. So you get to be a surgeon, you get, to use your hands, be up on your feet, get this instant gratification that you're doing, that you would get from any kind of procedural field. But then with neurosurgery, there's a ton of physiology and the anatomy is extremely complex. I'm biased clearly. So no one should get offended from listening to this, but I think the anatomy is just so much more intrinsic and complex. With neurosurgery too, we're not just simply removing something, like a tumor or attaching this to this. There's neuromodulation. There's spinal cord stimulators. There's brain mapping. There's really cool things that we're doing with the brain that don't just involve plopping a tumor out. So I think I don't know how anyone could not fall in love instantly. The problem is with neurosurgery, it comes with a lot of other baggage, right? Like you mentioned already, it is a male-dominated field, although that is changing. Hours can be rough. It is a very intense field in that, because we have so much responsibility, it can be intimidating and intense. And, it's not a wonder that everyone doesn't want that lifestyle, but I think the field itself is just amazing.
To hear you speak so passionately about what you do, especially after being so far along with your training, to still feel that way is great. We know you said a lot about gender specifically within neurosurgery, but we know you're the founder and co-president of the Gender Equity Initiative in Global Surgery. How specifically did your idea for this come about?
It's something that started for a while. I think being a woman in a surgical field, like a lot of other people that are in this position, I've had women reach out to me, younger women, and a lot in med school or some in undergrad, some in the US and some, well, a lot actually abroad, given like some of the global health stuff I've done. And they've asked for mentorship. They wanted guidance. They asked for research opportunities. And I, each time that happened, I did my best to connect them with this person I know here, or there's a project here that might interest you. And I always felt like this should be more structured, or like I wish there was a better way to be supportive to all these people, women and men, that I want to support along their way. So 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, I was approached by a few research associates at PGSSC, Program in Global Surgery and Social Change. They said, Jackie, like, we want to start an organization and we want to make it about global surgery, but we want to incorporate gender equity, which is a huge part of that field that is just missing. It's just a gap. And I immediately said yes. Like, that's exactly what I think I've been thinking about. I hadn't at the time knew how to realize that goal, but I think that was it.
Fantastic. And it's great that it started off so personally and it's now grown into this organization linked to the PGSSC. What kind of initiatives have you guys been working on through it?
Yeah, so the main kind of pillars that we have are research, mentorship, and advocacy. And we try to develop each of those because we believe that those three things are the most important initiatives or group of projects that we can do as a group that can further our goals of like gender equity. So I guess with like research, it's pretty straightforward. Our goal is to do a lot of gender-based research. And like I said before, in global surgery, nobody's doing that. It's just a huge gap. None of our metrics include gender-based elements. It's not out there at all. And so like no one's collecting indicators with this. So basically the sky is the limit. We could there's everything needs that. So our goal is to just start somewhere and start making that the norm and getting data out there that represents all genders. Mentorship is important. And to be honest, that's a personal one for me because like I said, my journey started with a lot of women asking for mentorship. There is a glass ceiling, and without mentorship, you can't expect to surpass that. Global surgery, or like really any field, it's kind of like, it's like a ball game or a club. There's a certain playbook to follow. There's guidelines. You need someone from the inside telling you how to do it, what all the plays are. And that's what mentorship is. And so without that, you're just on your own trying to figure it out. So, we've created a mentorship model. We did a lot of matching mentees, women with around the world with mentors who could help them with their along wherever they may be in their career path. And then advocacy, which I know we'll probably talk about later, but that's also another personal favorite of mine because I feel like in academics, we just exist in a bubble. We need to be more vocal just in general. So like we need to talk to other programs out there, other global surgery programs out there. We need to talk to other medical disciplines out there. And then we need to talk like outside of medicine and get general public interested. General public are the people who vote in policy makers, who get funders, who make things happen. And so if you can't engage people in like the things that are important to you, you're not going to get very far. Those are kind of the three things that we had set out to do.
That's fantastic. And I think something you said about making this a playbook, I think that's exactly what this comes down to with it, leveling the playing field. Because where this is a field that really hasn't had much going to it, I think on the global spectrum, there is no expert. We're looking at everyone having things to contribute equally.
If I could just ask a follow-up question, if you don't mind. You mentioned in research that that really isn't even a metric that's obtained. Do you think there's any specific reason why that is? Is that just because gender around the world is not as equitable? I mean, you've already said that there's been discrimination and things in the US and some of the more developed nations, but obviously hopefully that's better than in other places. Do you feel like it's just not something that's recognized maybe around the world?
I totally understand your question. And my personal opinion, I think that it wasn't like a conscious decision. People who are coming up with these indicators for country X, we're going to like map out the workforce of surgeons. I don't think anyone said like, well, let's not include women. I think the problem is that like those people making those metrics were men in most cases, especially around the world. And then I think even when you say you even have some women involved, I don't think it's recognized as being something that's important. I think it clearly is. I mean, and like, for instance, we're so short of surgical anesthesia and obstetric providers. And yet I don't think people understand that we won't hit like our metrics like that the Lancet Commission has recommended unless we include all genders. Like we just won't make it. We won't make those benchmarks. And so I just think they weren't in there because everyone was so excited to say, hey, let's map workforce, or like, let's map these diseases. And that's like the big step for us all back then was let's just get the basics down, get the foundations. But now that we have some of this data, it's important to say, okay, well, how many of your anesthesiologists are women? Like, what's your percentage there? Or like, how many patients suffering from this surgical disease, how many are women versus men? And how are they paying for it? And and because there's so many social and medical ramifications that are different, and different genders experience healthcare so differently. I think it's an unfortunate mistake that was left out. I think people are starting to understand that we need to do that. I mean, for that matter, race is another one, right? Like we hear this all the time in the US, how we haven't begun to really understand how race is affected by healthcare, or rather how healthcare is affected by race. So many times we've learned that we really should have been calculating these metrics a little differently to incorporate, well, what does this mean for African American populations versus white populations versus Hispanic and Latino populations?
I know if we talk about the global side of global surgery, this field just encompasses so many different nationalities and cultures, and sometimes that can be difficult when working across these boundaries. How have you navigated advocating for gender equity while respecting these cultural norms that may be different in different places?
That's a great question, because it is so different. And when we first started, we were still a small organization, and we still are, we're growing. And we're really excited that we had representation from every continent. So we had women and men from all around the world, with every continent represented, joining us for some of our research projects, our advocacy events, and things like that. So that was a positive, and we've tried to be open, listen if any one particular group was advocating for one thing or another. Although as time has passed, we've looked at our numbers again, and we said that's great that we have good people from all over the world joining, but we still have a lot of them being from the US and the UK. And we've had to actually kind of look in the mirror and be like, well, what are we doing wrong? Like, we're supposed to be global surgery, and we do a lot of global surgery research and talk about it all the time, but are we truly global? We have, like I said, one particular group that is way more represented. Something that we've thought of that we want to change with that is we're actually going through our turnover in leadership, like myself included. I'm stepping down and someone else will take over and things like that. And we decided to create new positions called regional liaisons. We're going to have an open application, so anyone can join, where we can get liaisons for each WHO region. These people, when we have these liaisons, can advocate for their region, tell us how we can recruit members from their area. They can tell us what projects they are interested in. They can keep us in check to make sure that we're doing exactly what you said, like being culturally sensitive, making sure there's no cultural or language barriers or whatever kind of barriers that we're missing. That's kind of our goal. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's something that's so important. And every organization, whether that's gender or just global surgery or whatever, it needs to constantly reevaluate, how are we being sensitive? How are we being inclusive? For that matter, same goes with gender. We had a couple people mention to us that, that's great that you're supporting and rooting for women, but what are you doing for non-binary people? And we were like, whoa, you're right. We have no non-binary representation in our organization, and we need that. We need that right away, because if we truly are inclusive and we truly care about equity, that matters, so much that we're doing that. This is a process that we're constantly trying to evolve. Hopefully we're getting a little closer with each iteration.
That sounds fantastic. And I think this whole idea of equal representation is a real difficulty for a lot of organizations, where it does tend to be dominated by the high-income country nations, despite the fact that it is global surgery. Is there any advice you give to people doing similar global surgery things to try and get more equal representation?
So I think as far as finding other people, it's not hard to find other people out there. That's the thing, is you put some feelers out there on Twitter or social media, and suddenly you have such an influx of interest, because people are interested in global surgery and global health, for that matter, and everybody is. I think as long as you're constantly doing that and reevaluating and then listening and asking the right questions and listening and saying okay, you are from this country here. What research do you want to see happen? And how do you want to be involved in our research? And, instead of us going there and being we think this kind of research is important. Do you want to be a part of it? I know we're all guilty of that. We need to try not to be.
This is a really rich discussion. Thank you so much for talking to us about gender equity. And are there any initiatives that you're particularly proud of that you guys have done?
I'm really proud of the research that we've started, which has just involved like big scoping reviews. And we started doing some medical student surveys. The research is great and will always be there. The thing that I actually value most, and again, probably from my personal experience, was we started this mentorship program, and basically it was like this like this speed dating for mentorship thing. We had or like an app for like to find your mentor. We had open calls for all women in the world out there. If you want a global surgery mentor, like sign up. And we got like a bunch of information about them. And then we went around asking every kind of attending or resident level person, like, would you be a mentor? And we got a couple hundred responses back, like just the first time, and we matched them. So like the back process of the app, that was me and co-founder Eliana. We like went through like different details about them, like where they're from. Some of the mentees preferred having a woman mentor, some didn't care, some wanted mentors in their own region, some wanted mentors in a different region. And so we matched as many as we could. And from that, I think we got some good relationships out of that. And I've heard back, at different times, intervals later, saying like, this relationship has been really beneficial, or they've valued their time. Thank you for kind of connecting us. The only downside really is that we didn't have enough mentors to do it anymore. Like we barely had enough mentors to match like all the women. And so we still constantly get a lot of women asking for it, and we kind of saturated the contacts we know. So I'd like to do it again another time. I'd like to see more mentorship, because again, we talked about how it's so important for advancing a woman's career, especially in other countries, but we just don't have enough. So
well, I guess if anyone's listening to this and wants to get involved, they know who to contact now.
Yes, exactly. Please do.
That's fantastic. That's so great. We'll definitely put your contact information in the notes of the session. So we'd like to move to your next specialty. You have many things that you're an expert on. And so we've kind of been talking about, global surgery peripherally, but we'd like to talk now directly about global surgery and a little bit about how your career actually led you to global surgery. Where did you come across global surgery, and what got you interested in that?
I wanted to do global health first. Like I decided a long time ago, I want to go to med school and I would like to do global health. And at that time, I thought I was going to be like a rural primary care doc, which is like totally different. And like my big spiel was like on chronic conditions and primary preventative care. And yeah, I fell in love with neurosurgery as I discussed. And there's like this process of reconciling what that means, because I love this field of neurosurgery. I also believe global health is, important, and it, like we're all, it's not just like global health, it's just like health in general. We're all part of this community. And so I think the definition of how you define a community can be whatever you want, local or large. So it took me a long time to figure out, well, if I do neurosurgery, does that mean my global health career is over? Like, how does that even work? And even now, I'm still trying to figure it out sometimes, because like global neurosurgery as a field is extremely new. And there's, in my opinion, a very specific kind of time and place for neurosurgery in global health. Like when you're working with healthcare systems that don't have much of a surgical system in place, like neurosurgery should not be the priority there. And I think like everyone will admit that, whether they want to or not. Like neurosurgery requires expensive microscopes and MRIs and stuff. And like right now, like we have to build up surgery, we have to scale up surgery and like strengthen healthcare systems. And that's where we should really be diverting our attention to. Bottom line is I've always wanted to do global health, and the neurosurgery came second. And so finding out how those two collide has been more of the challenge, to be honest.
That's really interesting how your global health passion came before your surgery passion. And actually this whole global surgery movement has kind of combined the two. What first led you to want to get involved with global health then?
To be honest, I don't know. Like since I was in high school, like this was something I wanted, and I don't know what was like the initial motivation. I've seen a bit, like even when I was very young, felt like I wanted to help people. Always liked the idea of traveling. At some point, like in this, I read Mountains Beyond Mountains, which obviously like who doesn't read that and just like solidify everything you think about and like want to do with global health. Yeah, it's been just a long time passion. And I think like at the time, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't even know what global health was. I probably, when I was younger, thought it was about mission trips and, going overseas and like donating a bunch of things and, cranking out a bunch of surgeries and doing that a few times a year. Obviously I've learned that that's not what that means. I think it's hard. And that's what our job is too in the global surgery community, is because that's the common perception. That was my perception years ago. And I think it's our job to educate people and advocate for like what does it really mean to be like interested in global surgery or global health.
I think you highlight some really good things. There's a lot of benefits and a lot of challenges. And I mean, I wish everyone could have seen your face just light up when you started talking about neurosurgery. You're just like, you can see that you truly love this and you truly love global health. And that's so fun to see in your face and to see in all of our faces as we're truly passionate about this. But as we know, and as you pointed out, working global surgery does come with some setbacks. So can you talk about maybe some of the ones that you've faced and what you learned from those?
Honestly, dealing with setbacks is something we all have to deal with, whether we're in global surgery or just getting through residency. Like I said, anyone who's doing research will inevitably get their papers rejected. I can't tell you how many of these like manuscripts I've started that have led to nowhere, or like we had to settle, or whatever. Like that happens commonly to anybody, or most people. I'm sure there's some people out there that just like are research buffs and can get it done every time, but
it is hard.
Yeah. But anyway, so I guess there's that. When I started at PGSSC, I had a couple health issues that prevented me from traveling. I was like at a global surgery fellowship. Traveling was pretty important, and I kind of had to relearn how to do everything like from home and how I can still accomplish my goals, or at least some goals. Changing my goals maybe to accommodate the things that were going on in my life. And I did. And I don't know. And it was a different year than I thought it'd be. But like, because I had all this time that I wasn't traveling, I had all this other time to devote to gender equity and kind of, get involved with my organization and meet tons and tons of inspiring women and men. So I think it's just about rolling with the punches and changing your, it's like my goals are constantly changing. That's okay. Like we all have goals, but it's also okay to move them.
I think we're all kind of learning that lesson with COVID right now.
Yeah, it's so true.
Everyone's just kind of, wanting to travel or wanting to do, global surgery stuff. And, the fact of the matter is you can't. And so you need to find new ways to get involved with global surgery research or advocacy or, whatever the pillar, the thing that you want to focus on is. But at this moment in time, that is not going to necessarily mean that you're on the ground working with the people that you're trying to serve, right? I think you brought up a really important aspect for any time, but also for all of our listeners now who are listening and thinking about how they're getting involved with global surgery at this time, that while on the outside it may look like you're not getting the opportunity that you wanted, there's probably another opportunity that you wouldn't have had otherwise that you can capitalize on, and a huge difference in that space instead. For example, gender equity in your case.
It sounds like something really great came out of that year with this gender equity initiative. Did you have any personal experiences during your time working in the PGSSC of gender equity in global surgery?
As far as like gender equity, PGSSC was so supportive. Everybody was interested. My supervisor, Dr. Mira, who's the founder of PGSSC, one of the original Lancet commissioners, he loved the idea. And, even he said like, whoa, you're right. It's weird. We haven't really talked about gender equity. And people are like, why? My fellows I was in a fellow class of all men, and they supported me and like always came to like the advocacy events that I held and helped us with some research, helped promote the things that I was trying to promote. A few of them became mentors in my program. And so, yeah, I think I was just so relieved because it was kind of a different track, right? Like everybody, the way PGSSC works is like everybody kind of there's like certain regions that everybody does their research in, and you kind of get assigned to that region, and that's where you do the bulk of your work. And then there's also like secondarily, you might do work with your specialty, like plastic surgery or neurosurgery, for example. And gender wasn't like a research track there. And it like I said, I was so supported and really happy I was. I don't think we could have launched without that support.
Sounds like you paved the way for a lot of people to follow in your footsteps there as well.
I hope so.
Do you think that is something that could be a track going forward for PGSSC, or?
It might be. So we're like this sister program to PGSSC now. So like in theory, we don't need to have someone at PGSSC. Like it could be housed anywhere. But
Sure.
The fellow beneath me, her name's Alexis Bowder. She's going to be one of the research leads, and she's been helping out a lot with research. So like we have like somebody at PGSSC who's doing gender research. And actually another one of the first year fellows, Alaska, she does a bunch of gender research too. So I think it's kind of cool to see that like people are doing that. Part of my my organization, but in like also on their own, and they're doing it at PGSSE. And I wouldn't be surprised if just like every year it kind of rolls over into the next year because they know it's an option now. And so we'll see. I mean, like it doesn't have to be there like at PGSSE. Like we have like a turnover every year with new leadership. And like as far as like what is the physical address of Gender Equity Initiative in Global Surgery, it could definitely move, but it's nice to know that like we're close to Boston and we're there and we have support over there.
Frankly, that's what we're trying to do with global surgery advocacy in and of itself. You mentioned John Mara, amazing guy, one of the first people who really said, hey guys, like we talk about global health all the time. Like, why aren't we talking about global surgery? Kind of like you said, like we're talking about global surgery, but why aren't we talking about gender equity, right? And so it just takes someone to like kind of point it out and be like, hey, like why are we not thinking about this? And, put a little flame under it. I mean, look at the global surgery movement today because of that Lancet Commission. They approached Lancet and said, this should be an issue. And then the WHO and all these people started getting on board. And now there's a huge movement of thousands of, students around the world who are in various organizations. And I don't think we should underestimate what the power of what you're doing right now could hold in the future of putting a magnifying glass on the issue of gender equity in global surgery. And who knows what that can bring. It's exciting.
Yeah, it is.
So on to the final pillar of your expertise that we wanted to kind of learn about. I mean, we're talking about all the great work that you're doing and broadcasting that. And one of the great things that we can use to bring attention to these issues, such as gender equity, global surgery, whatever it is media. I mean, it's an extraordinarily powerful resource. And you have been someone who's really been able to utilize this power for good. I mean, we talked about it in your bio. You've been able to publish in many notable outlets like JAMA, Forbes, Huffington Post, among many others. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with writing for some of these organizations?
Yes. So I am very passionate about advocacy and writing, specifically within advocacy. I started when I was an intern. Like I actually never really wrote that much when I was younger. And when I became an intern and started working at hospitals, I felt like I had all these feelings that I wanted to talk about. We were working with patients, especially in the ICU, and dealing with hard ethical issues that we face in medicine, dealing with end-of-life care that we see so often. And so I found myself wanting to write and journal and kind of like have an outlet of expression. And so actually, it was my husband who said, you should publish these things. Like they're good and you should try to get them out there. And that's kind of when I started. And it started with just like some small essays, like op-eds, but kind of op-eds with some feeling. And it's just a habit I kept up throughout the years, honestly. And it's kind of like snowballed into more and more. Like I started just kind of reaching out to like random newspapers, magazines, and then got like a small position like as a Huffington Post contributor. And later I was lucky actually when I was in Boston to do like a small 4-week internship at Stat News, and picked up some really great skills about like reporting and like working in their like healthcare newsroom. And then lately I've approached to do this position at Forbes. Yeah, that's kind of how it started and how I hope it goes.
It's amazing. And obviously this is very different to the world of peer-reviewed journals. What's it like working with some of these organizations?
It's good. It's different. So I think these editors generally do want like are interested in us, like as doctors in general, they're interested in healthcare. They know that's important and that readers want it. The thing that's slightly different is that they care what like the public cares about. And so when you're writing, it could be about something you feel very passionate about, that you care about strongly, but it has to somehow relate to the everyday person or like be important to them. So that's something that like they're worried about, not so much, oh, I have this like really great research article that came out and it's really important and it's a really big advancement. And they'll be like, okay, that's wonderful, but like, what is important about it that like this person walking down the street will care? So it's just a different way of looking at the same topics that we think about in global surgery or medicine in general.
Yeah, and it must be difficult adapting to speaking to the public rather than speaking to the scientific community.
Yeah, it is. So I tell everyone, like, we do so much writing in medicine. Like, all of us at this stage in our lives, like, know how to write and know how to write well. Like, we are articulate, we have like the right vocabulary, we are concise even, which is something that a lot of us have learned just from like our manuscript writing. But there are some nuances where you do have to like learn a few small skills, which are easy to learn, by the way, like anybody can, and just tweak it to be like, why should the everyday person care about this topic that you're talking about? Explain it to them in a way that they would understand, again, not being too jargony. And so it is like a skill set, but it's not a hard skill set, just one that you have to like be conscious about as you're writing.
Could you maybe kind of walk us through, like, you come up with an idea, start us from the very first idea phase to, publication. What does that process look like?
So this happened early in COVID, right? Like there was a ton of stuff going on about PPE. Like we didn't have enough of it. Everyone was really like worried. A bunch of people out there were making like these novel PPE devices and like trying to come up with creative ways to like maybe reuse and clean the old PPEs. And so a friend of mine who works at Boston Children's, she's doing a Boston Children's Brigham Innovation Fellowship. Like their team came up with this way to kind of not replace the N95, but like to use this if we run out of N95s. There was like some kind of a research component, but she also like, they talked about it on their website. And so I said, oh, this would be great to like talk about. So I contacted her, got an interview, like wrote a quick article. These articles are short, which is a nice thing. Like you could write it as short as 600 words. That could take you a couple hours. I mean, that's a really short piece. Just made sure like facts were right and stuff like that, and publish it on Forbes. So if I wasn't working for Forbes, because that's the nice thing, now that I'm a contributor, I can kind of get my pieces out whenever I want. But like say before this, I would write this article, get it edited very well, like ask friends, look over a million times, and just send it to a newspaper. And basically in your email to the editor, you say like, dear editor, like we are short of PPEs. Like this is why this article is super important, and then include the article. And that's kind of the process of like submitting an op-ed.
Obviously, like we already talked about before in global surgery, there's going to be some challenges that you'll run into in this space as well, right? I'm sure you maybe perhaps get people complaining or wanting to give another view that's different than yours, or that something like that. So could you maybe just tell us about some of the challenges that you faced in being a little bit more on the global stage, I guess you could say?
Kind of like you mentioned, there are people who don't like the things I write. Sometimes it's related to politics. Like I've written a few things that, like, for instance, have criticized Trump for this or that, or like I recently wrote a piece defending WHO when Trump threatened to defund. And yeah, like every time if I put it online, there'll be people in the comments or whatever that will say no, or like or be mean. I try not to, just at least with online, I do not engage with anybody like and get into some like really petty bantering. I've heard generally it's just a bad practice to get into. But yeah, so like there's definitely that. I wrote, for instance, an article that talked about opioids and how surgeons or doctors in general are contributing to the epidemic because we're overprescribing. We shouldn't be. This is something that we should be like really careful about. This is back a couple years ago when like North Carolina at least just rolled out a new policy or a set of policies related to prescribing laws. And actually that article, more than any of the ones I've had, got a ton of pushback. Many people like contacting me, emailing me, patients saying like, don't take away my opioids. Like you don't know anything, or like
Wow.
you shouldn't be talking about this. And I feel bad. Like someone who's that angry about it, it means that they're in pain and they feel like scared that the one thing that's probably alleviating their pain is going to be gone. And like that's the issue with the opioid epidemic in general, is that it's really polarizing and it's controversial and it's a difficult problem to solve. When it comes to people's pain, obviously as doctors we want to alleviate their pain, but like we also don't want to feel like we're contributing to all these overdose deaths and things like that. So yeah, I've had my share of those things, maybe not as many as like other writers have. And I just, like I said, my way of dealing it is I don't engage with them online. I do try to like listen, and like I know their side, and I like, if someone has a good argument, I should know about it, right? Like if I'm arguing to keep funding the WHO and someone has some like really great information that might be like contrary to that, like I guess I'd be a hypocrite to like ignore that kind of data. So try to read it with an open mind and consider it, but like also throw away like the rest of the distraction that there might be in like the way they said it, or mean words that they use or whatever, something like that.
You raise a good point there, where your role is, most people are just one of a journalist or a surgeon, not both, and actually balancing the two must be so difficult for you because you're having to change both hats in how you're responding to people and how you're putting yourself out there. How do you balance doing these different roles? And of all the roles you do in your life, which do you find the most enjoyable?
For the most part, I don't do all of them all at once. So that's a nice thing about it. Especially the last 2 years, I've been off doing research stuff, not in the hospital at all, really. So again, I was able to really focus a lot of energy into the gender stuff and to writing, getting the Forbes thing. And then when I go back to clinicals, this week, I'm sure a lot of that stuff will have to take a slight backseat and then cutting back on a lot of other things. I think all of us, myself included, are have to learn continually how to figure out your bandwidth and not exceed that, and figure prioritize the things that you have in your life, which includes just wellness and mental health and yourself. Yes, I might write and be a surgeon and do some gender things, but I also have to make sure that taking care of myself in other ways, and I'm being a spouse, a good sister, a good family member, and I'm not saying I do it well. I'm just saying I try, and at least I think about it. So I think out of all those things, being a surgeon, that's the most important thing. As much as I love writing, as much as I love working with men and women and promoting gender equity, I just love working with patients. It's the best job for me. I don't think I could do another job. If I had to choose, I would just say, fine, I'll be a surgeon, and I'll drop the rest. So hopefully I don't have to make that choice.
No, that's super profound. I think you touch on a really interesting point, just that, as physicians, we're generally fairly highly involved people, and high achievers in general, and we want to get involved in things, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. But as you said, not trying to do everything at once, and just knowing your boundaries and your bandwidth, and just trying to take it one day at a time is great, and to take advantage of amazing opportunities. For example, what you took with PGSSC, to take some time out from clinical work because you knew there was other interests that you had, but you didn't want to necessarily leave clinical medicine. But that's a great opportunity for you to take a small pause on that, go do some of your other passions, and then be able to come back on clinical medicine. That's fantastic. Last couple questions that we wanted to ask you are a little bit more just general, and I think we've kind of already started into the advice section with knowing your bandwidth and stuff, but we were just wondering, what advice would you give yourself in maybe 5, 10, or even 20 years ago?
If I could give myself advice, I would probably speak about having confidence. Struggling with insecurity or lack of confidence is something I had for a long time, and I still do. And there's issues of imposter syndrome, issues of insecurity. And I think if I could go back in time, I would say to myself, hey, don't be that way. It's okay. You shouldn't feel that way. But I'd also say, but if you do, that's also okay. Because I don't think people normalize those issues enough. And I think they're actually much more common than any of us really know, because no one wants to admit that I'm not feeling very confident about this or myself, or I don't feel like I belong here. I think we all feel that at some point, and I don't think anyone actually admits it. And I don't know, it's anecdotally, it feels like that's a problem with women more than men. I don't know if there's ever been a study on that, but I wouldn't be surprised. It feels that way, at least from what I've experienced.
Definitely another idea for more research down the line then. You spoke a lot with your gender equity about mentorship being a huge pillar of what you do. Who's someone who's mentored you, and why did they influence you so much?
So I probably the strongest mentor I've had, in this part of my career is Dr. Haglin, who's at Duke. He's actually interested. He does a lot of global health work. He's been the program director at Duke for many, many years. He brought me to Duke. I owe so much of my career to him, because not only did he indirectly help me through mentorship and this or that, but he recruited me, and he's the reason why I ended up at Duke. He encouraged me to go to Harvard and do the global surgery stuff. He's been there for me with some personal things I've had. It hasn't even just been professional. I think of him as someone who mentors me, but someone who cares about me. It's nice to have that, especially in residency, where I don't think many people do, to be honest. Some people don't have mentors at all, and some people, have them because when they work on research projects, and it's very limited to this one thing. So I'm very fortunate to have had him in my life.
That sounds super enriching, and yeah, finding those people in your life who can really guide you and lead you, and then to pass it on, right? To continue to, you've had that, and it sounds like you already are through your gender equity and stuff, and setting up a whole mentorship program to help other people who are following behind in your footsteps, and hopefully that they do the same, so that we can really create that great network. Just to wrap up, we ask all of our panelists our final 5. These 5 questions are dedicated to those 5 billion people around the world who lack access to surgical care that, John Mara's paper really highlighted for us all. And so we just have 5 questions that we'd like to ask everyone. Some of them are a little bit more lighthearted, and others a little bit more soul-searching, but The first question is, what is the most recent book that you've read?
So I'm embarrassed to admit this. I haven't read a book in a long time. So I thought about this and I can't remember. Like aside from like medical textbook and like, learning neurosurgery stuff, I haven't read a book for fun in at least 5 years or more. So
I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Okay.
You do so much reading. I'm sure that it's the last thing you want to do when you come home.
Yeah.
She's writing the stuff for other people to read. That's what she's saying.
Right.
I guess I'll ask you the next one then. So what's something not many people know about you or a special talent?
I love tattoos. I have a bunch. I try to keep it very professional so most people can't like see them or know about them, but I think they're like this really great way, very permanent way to like for artistic expression. And I think people would be surprised to know that an anti-talent I have is that I can't drive. Horrible. I avoid it at all costs.
I bet living in Durham, that's really easy to do to avoid.
It's been tough. I didn't drive for 2 years when I lived in Durham, and like I just biked and I bummed rides off people, and then my husband's like, "That's it. You got to go and get your license." So I finally have one.
What is your favorite tattoo that you have?
I have a lotus on my shoulder.
Beautiful.
It's cute.
So the third question is, what was your favorite toy growing up and why?
I paint a lot, and when I was growing up, I had like a ton of art supplies, crayons, paints, pens, canvas, things like that. So those were by far my favorite, and I just love to do it. I still like to paint.
Fantastic. So you're very creative then.
I mean, I try to be. Sometimes I Google like a picture first, so it may not exactly be creativity, like true creativity, but I like to go with the emotions.
I'm sure you need something after a long day at work just to relax and chill out with. So our fourth question is quite literally the $1 million question. And that's, if you had $1 million, how would you spend it?
This is boring. I would pay off my student loans.
Not boring, super important.
They cost so much.
Oh, you don't know. So then I would pay it off, and then with what I have remaining, I will try to like travel as much as I can. But definitely, if I get, my husband would kill me if I had extra funds that like didn't go straight to the student loans.
With that's left over, you probably have enough to like buy a cheeseburger, right?
Yeah, exactly. I treat myself to like some McDonald's and holiday.
That's so great. Our fifth and final question is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received?
So this is like, there's nothing very like ponderous about this, but I thought this was pretty useful when I was starting my rotations in med school. Someone said, and I can't remember who it was, said, fake it till you make it, or something like that. And it's silly, but it is so true in medicine. Like you so often, especially in med school, I mean, especially in surgery too, when we're in the training phase, like you don't fully know what you're doing, or like you're doing it right, but you feel like you're doing it wrong. You just have like every insecurity. You don't know what you're doing. And like one day you wake up, you've gone through the motions, and you're like, oh yeah, like I know how to do that procedure, or like I'm an expert on this by now, So I think it's kind of good for us to remember, like eventually, like you will get it. You just gotta like fake it till that happens.
Well, Jackie, I don't think you're faking it. You have definitely made it. You're doing incredible work. We are very, very thankful that you took the time to be with us today and share these 3 pillars that you're really strong on: global surgery, gender equity, and your journalism, which is all fantastic. And you're really making it. You're excelling in those things. And we just thank you for your example to all of us.
Thank you. No, this was a great experience. Thanks for having me here.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Global Scalpels. If you're interested in learning more about this topic or the speaker, visit us on the web at globalscalpels.com or any of our social media platforms. Please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, YouTube, and Stitcher to hear more great content on a wide range of topics within global surgery.
If you or someone you know is doing something in global surgery you feel should be highlighted in Global Scalpels, we would love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us today and hope to see you on our next episode.